Leandra Medine Cohen was a popular fashion blogger who ran the website Man Repeller from 2010 to 2020. Man Repeller came to a controversial end after what was deemed a hypocritical response to the Black Lives Matter movement. Man Repeller's rise to fame was pretty uncomplicated and typical for 2010's content entrepreneurs. However, even though Man Repeller was being covered by a lot of mainstream press outlets, there was one question the average viewer was wondering that was never answered. Her 2013 book, Leandra admitted to having an eating disorder, but she didn't write about it in depth. However, the subject brought up the question of whether or not she still had an issue. Pictures of her were looked at with a new eye and raised more suspicion. A follow-up to her illness from high school was never addressed. I'll be going over a blog post that points out all of the things wrong with the way the author unveiled her anorexia. Quote, "It is unclear whether or not Medine is poking fun at her own ignorance or if she truly is unaware of her actions and the negative repercussions of her physical health. After having read Leandra's book, I can say she definitely was not aware her actions had negative repercussions, especially regarding how she spoke about them and what really was going on in her childhood. Not only that, but there is a lot of blatant dysfunction among her family that she didn't call out because she never stopped to think if indeed that the way she was raised by them was actually a healthy environment. There was a lot more that influenced her deadly disorder that she was not aware of, a disorder she likely is still struggling with to this day. She grew up in a strict Orthodox Jewish family. The Orthodox community has a lot of dark secrets. Mental health is a big issue and often doesn't get addressed properly. The community has a history of covering up a lot of moral violations, such as assault and mental breakdowns. The Orthodox community often adheres to strict traditional gender roles, in which the man is the strongest authority in the household and shouldn't be contested. Leandra didn't seem to grow up that strict, but her upbringing did observe a lot of traditions in their community. New York City's Jewish community is very tight-knit, and Jews have always faced pressure to present themselves as the perfect role models in order to gain acceptance. Prestige, image, and performance are great pressures, especially to young Jewish girls. Leandra definitely felt these pressures at a young age. The issues began when Leandra gained an uncomfortable amount of weight at summer camp. It seems simple enough that someone whose normal life consists of a strict dietary regimen would go a little overboard when suddenly allowed to indulge in more junk food with unregulated meal prepping. However, the way she described returning home is a lot more concerning. "I hugged my parents and started to cry. I was miserable, but certainly not because of how I looked. I had just spent 2 months as an independent at camp, living life on my own terms, and now I had to go back to being my parents' daughter, sleeping under their roof and adhering to their rules." The fact that she wasn't happy to return home because she felt restricted is concerning. Her camp life was so carefree, she didn't feel pressure to watch her meal intake. The fact food suddenly felt liberating is an issue, but it gets worse in terms of her arrival at home after gaining weight. The time after Leandra arrived back from camp was a disaster. She was pushing herself to eat while still hyper-focused on her body. Then the family went to Italy, which was an excuse to compare herself to other girls more. Feeling more inadequate, Leandra embraced taking out her frustrations on food. This led to her feeling like she could only be accepted if she acted like the designated ugly fat friend stereotype. Eventually, her parents started to battle with her on her weight. This made her debate with herself on wanting to self-improve and to gain the popularity she craved so much. Leandra did want to be conventionally attractive to gain attention from boys and wear the clothes she couldn't fit in. However, those had nothing to do with why she gained an unhealthy amount of weight in the first place. To make matters worse, not getting boys' attention meant she deserved to be treated like a toddler, something her friends and family reinforced. When it came to Leandra's parents, they took the abusive drill sergeant approach. Leandra had a strong personality and was told by important people in her life that her weight was a problem, not what her weight was an outcome of. So she kicked herself into drill sergeant mode and dieted intensely, so much so that she would have won The Biggest Loser. She admitted her motivation was surprising to her parents, who thought that she was a lost cause. She was adhering to the same controlled environment that got her to gain an unhealthy amount of weight in the first place. Leandra thought her goal was to be thin to get the things she wanted. But that wasn't her real motive. Her real motive was to stop the abuse. So being thin for self-improvement was a false narrative she was living by. It was really escaping the burden imposed by others put on her that she was trying to fight back. Because her heart wasn't really desiring to be thin because it wasn't an aesthetic she naturally came to her own liking on her own, she just wanted to get away from the punishment of fatness. She never had a clear goal of the ideal kind of thin body she wanted since it wasn't really her own ideal to begin with. It was a false narrative that Leandra was trying to drastically change herself for the sake of wanting approval from boys and other privileges. That is why she and many others really don't know when to stop, because she had no real concept of the perfect ideal thin body, because that was not really what she wanted to begin with. So she stopped getting her period and she started to look very frail. By the time she reached her very vague, diluted goal that was imposed by others, she really stopped caring about winning other people's respect. Breaking away from the body that brought her abuse and brought a new romantic fantasy that had really nothing to do with the people that pressured her to lose weight was what drove her to becoming very unhealthy. Quote, "But my weight loss didn't stop the silliness. As it turned out, I didn't really want to be elegant like my mother. I thought I wanted her elegance, but it was simply the ease I noticed in her eyes when she looked at her reflection contentedly. That was what I wanted, to love whoever I was, which is vastly different from plain old elegance." Leandra claimed that she wanted to be comfortable with herself, but 1, she was feeding into the issue that made her uncomfortable in the first place. 2, comfortable doesn't mean liking herself. It meant being secure from shame. Whenever she talked about what she liked about herself, it was in comparison to someone else. 3, just because she was secure from shame doesn't mean she won't stop being afraid of it. Why? Because she was still around people who shamed her to begin with. There's always the fear that she could be subjected to it again out of the blue like the first time. To make matters worse, her family was also shocked and proud of her, which only showed and proved to Leandra that doing things out of fear was the best way to do things. The next chapter has a story that is meant to be humorous but is actually alarming. It tells of Leandra being 8 years old and wanting to dress like a Spice Girl. Her mom said it was inappropriate for someone her age, but Leandra immediately blamed herself, thinking she was too fat to inhabit the kind of look, which likely kicked off the weight issue that happened when she was at camp. Why would an 8-year-old blame herself for being fat despite never having been told so? Later, her mother said she didn't like her daughter dressing like a Spice Girl because of the promiscuity it symbolized. And to be clear, yes, an 8-year-old dressing like a Spice Girl is a problem and should be condemned, but the way Leandra's mother complained about it is what the real problem is. How can anyone really think an 8-year-old would be promiscuous? The obvious issue would be an 8-year-old emulating something she doesn't understand and shouldn't. That would be the real issue that should be dealt with internally, which it wasn't in the first place. Leandra's mother never explained why a Spice Girl would symbolize something that would be damaging to someone her daughter's age, leaving Leandra to believe the Spice Girl look specifically would not look good on her, and weight is the first thing that she came to blame. In conclusion, anytime a child is shamed for a character flaw, they will take it out on themselves physically, since something has to change, and looks are easier to change than personality. Now, changing looks doesn't change behavior or personality, but it does signify to the abusers that you agree with being criticized and that you are trying to disassociate yourself with who you were before, the person that was being criticized. Also, looks put out an impression of personality that you're trying to inhabit but can't. From the outside, we think anorexia as depraving yourself, but depraving means keeping away something that you want. To anorexics, it's about getting rid of something permanently. If you can get rid of as much as your body as possible, then by proxy, all the character flaws of your personality and psychology will be removed as well. But you can't get rid of flesh permanently, so it's always feeling you can't achieve your goals. She was very influential in the alternative quirky girl style, not in any gothic or rave or underground sort of way, but in a much more casual way. Her blog, Man Repeller, was a haven for women who wanted to dress for the fun of dressing and not for the specific goal of trying to be a sexy image that satisfies other people. Hence the name Man Repeller. But Leandra Medine Cohen has had controversies pretty much from the very beginning, and her career ended with a controversy in which news came out that she was very racist to her staff at the peak of the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement. She subsequently shut down Man Repeller and has been laying low ever since. In my experience researching about Leandra Medine Cohen, I found her backstory very disturbing. She left a lot of breadcrumbs that lead on a trail of serious dysfunction that went on in her childhood, even if the candy house with the witch may not be completely visible. But it's definitely there. The term iceberg is popular, and when it comes to her anorexia, there is that little bit peeking up through the surface, but also there is a huge indicator that the iceberg goes way, 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 way down into the abyss, where it's very difficult or impossible to see. So that iceberg is really an underwater ice mountain. In reading Leandra Medine Cohen's book about her childhood, it very much was like somebody saying their skin was scratched by a bullet. And that would bring the question, scratched by a bullet? Was someone trying to shoot at you? What could have been going on that would make someone want to harm you? But you never get the answer. and nobody gets scratched by a bullet if a bullet is shot. They're shot at, and the bullet almost murdered them. The way Leandra told stories from her childhood were supposed to be very much like, oh, look how funny and cute this is. I came from a quirky, weird family. Ha ha ha. But what she experienced was really nothing to joke about, but she didn't realize that. So you never really know what was really going on because she was unable and is still unable to confront it. So background, Leandra Medine Cohen grew up in a very strict Orthodox Jewish household. And Orthodox Judaism is very oppressive to women, as many extreme sections of religions around the world are. Women are oppressed. Women exist to serve men. Women must never assert themselves past the man. Also, I should bring up there is a stereotype that Jewish families are very overprotective and coddling of their children and baby them all their lives. And of course, that isn't everyone, but it does appear to have been the case with Leandra's childhood, as it seems the acceptable behavior throughout her younger years was significantly less mature than the standard of most American childhoods. For example, she seemed to be doing activities associated with very young children well into her teens, and her thoughts seemed more aligned with the standard of much younger grade school children than that of a teenager, especially when it came around romance and dating. Again, something very much discouraged in the Orthodox faith. Leandra very much seemed to have not been accepted by her family, and there were a lot of hints she was bullied by them, especially over her body image and especially by the hands of her brother. She mentioned very shortly being bullied for being overweight, which, by the way, I doubt she was actually overweight as a child, and feeling a deep shame that boys were not interested in her, and also believing other people when they said boys would not be interested in her. So she stopped eating to lose the weight until the needle shifted to the other end and her family got concerned over her full-blown anorexia. What she did about it? Well, that's not really known. She left that part of her life on a cliffhanger, implying that she just got over it without ever saying she took steps to recover. She just wanted the reader to believe she managed to recover naturally, and she didn't. The other unspoken of trauma from her childhood that has reared its head in the way she has branded herself is, one, even though she said her blog was always about feminism and women's liberation, she got married at 23, which again very much seems in line and in values with the faith she grew up in. Two, the way she branded her fashion and spoke about the way she chose to dress herself, she always gravitated towards things that are unconventional for what is considered to make an attractive woman, which is fine. There is nothing wrong with that. And she said she did it for the sake of women's liberation and enjoying fashion for yourself and no one else. But in a lot of ways, the way she wrote about her choice of style was reminiscent of the Orthodox Jewish faith of women having to cover their bodies, not show them, because one of a woman's biggest vice is to accidentally seduce men with her image. I personally think that could be true, but I also think there's something else that gets left out of this when talking about how her childhood affected the way she wanted to live her life as an adult and express her love of fashion. Man Repeller started as a joke of women dressing not for the sake of attracting men, but for the sake of only being attracted to themselves, which can deviate from what is expected of the way they should dress. But I have to wonder if Leandra Medine Cohen always grew up believing she didn't deserve the attention of men, that she wasn't deserving of love and to be seen as beautiful because of her parents. So she gravitated towards things that were not conventionally beautiful. It would be the perfect way to reincarnate her self-esteem issues and merge it with her passion for fashion. She always had a passion for fashion, which again, in the Orthodox Jewish faith, that can be a huge problem, given that she is not supposed to make herself overly attractive, at least not until she's married, and of course only for her husband then, which also again could be explained why she got married so young, because she did want to finally dress herself up in a way that is obviously trying to be stylish, but the fact that she would be married would give her the excuse that it's for her husband, so it wouldn't be taboo in her community. But I digress. Leandra expressed a passion for fashion at a very young age, and she recalled being 8 years old and wanting to dress like a Spice Girl, which meant wearing a crop top, which her mother would not allow. Now, her mother was right to say that because no, an 8-year-old girl should not be dressing like a Spice Girl and wearing a crop top. But what's telling is Leandra Medine Cohen admitted she thought the reason why she wasn't allowed to dress like a Spice Girl was she was too fat and she didn't look like a Spice Girl, which tells me she struggled with body image issues from an extremely young age. Even though she claimed up until she was getting made fun of by her brothers, she didn't struggle with her body image, but she clearly did. And at 8 years old, that tells me she was being harshly judged from an extremely young age. And it's interesting, she would grow up to never really care about that kind of Spice Girl fashion ever again. She would always gravitate towards the opposite. It's been rumored things have not been going well for her post-cancellation, and so it had been said Leandra Medine Cohen has been getting progressively worse with her eating disorder. She's been getting thinner and looking more emaciated. People who've seen her on the street in New York City where she lives have gawked and shocked at how bad she's been getting. And I found quite a few other Reddit forums of different people claiming to have also seen her and be extremely worried. All those will be linked below as well. And if you don't believe me, you can just look at her Instagram. She has been getting progressively worse. She didn't look great before. It was obvious she had some kind of issues with eating pretty much since she got famous, but she had managed to maintain it pretty much all of her career. But it seems interesting now, suddenly it gets much worse. In the general conversation about why she's been getting worse, the general consensus is that because she no longer has Man Repeller, she's been suffering from serious depression. Man Repeller was her career for a long time and she lost it. She actually has a new website now and a newsletter, and she actually still has a fashion collaboration going. So her blogging career hasn't ended, but it definitely, she'll never have the height of success she had before. So with what's being written about her, the general consensus is she's upset she isn't going to have the career she had before. That could be the case, but I also want to add, I think Man Repeller was the only real sense of independence she got pretty much all of her life. She went from being a good Jewish daughter to pretty much being a good Jewish wife almost immediately. So she never got much of a sense of independence. And Man Repeller was the only thing that separated her from the societal expectations she grew up in. But I also think there has to be something else in addition. Because while yes, Man Repeller indeed had a full staff and it was a big career for her, Leandra Medine Cohen came from a very rich family and she married very rich. She didn't need Man Repeller to live a comfortable, happy life. While it was a very lucrative business, it started out and she did treat it very much like an expensive hobby. So I looked around more, and in the meantime of Man Repeller happening, she became a mother, and she's still the mother of very young children, twins to be specific. And I found this video off of her husband's Instagram.
Good job, ballerina. What's this? What am I doing? What's this called?
This video gave me very creepy vibes. Now, there is nothing wrong with this video. Nothing bad is happening here. It's a mother playing with her children. That's totally fine. Although I found the fact they were all wearing matching dresses interesting, but I mean, parents do that. It's not the most unusual thing. But like I said, it gave me vibes, and I had to wonder, Leandra Medine Cohen is a mother of 2 young children, and again, motherhood is the most important thing for someone of an Orthodox Jewish background. So I'm curious to know how motherhood affected her. And yes, there is a lot of literature about how motherhood affects anorexia and makes anorexia worse, but the majority of it is about stress and societal pressure and coping and mothers being overworked and anorexia being a coping mechanism for that. Leandra is very rich. she is not overworked, okay? This woman lives a very leisurely and comfortable life. You can tell by her Instagram. So in her new website, she has a newsletter and she talks about motherhood. And these posts scared me to death. So let's now read over them together. I actually think this might be the most in-depth she's been about motherhood in a very long time. She did talk about it while Man Repeller was at its peak, but not this much in depth. But obviously, since our kids are much older now, and some time has passed since the end of Man Repeller, now she incorporates it more into her general brand. So this post from June 10th, 2022, I think I understand how much real estate the labor of mother was going to occupy on the train of my identity, how all-consuming it was going to be. I think one big risk that comes with motherhood is that of losing yourself, but really of letting yourself believe that you're no longer important, that in the grand scheme of needs, yours really don't matter, that you are becoming invisible. I have only one reference for whether it can be true that a woman could really become invisible, and that is the way I experienced my mom, though to me, she was never invisible. But for sure, I did feel that she had no needs, or just didn't care for, or maybe respect the needs that were her own. That her role in life, her singular raison d'etre, was to serve as a springboard for me. Did she do this on purpose to extend an invitation for me to uncover my agency? To do it with enough confidence, but really with safety to know if I fell, no matter how hard, there was always a springboard beneath me? Sometimes I resent her for making me feel so important, for letting me believe that my needs are real. When I started trying to have kids is when I resented the most, but back then I didn't know I knew that this is what I resented. For sure though, I wanted some distance from her. I thought it was really part of me that is forever connected to her. Maybe I could not wrap my head around the possibility that the sum of my parts would need to, or worse even want to become so wrapped up in someone else that would be like I stopped existing. I could not wrap my head around how a woman could respect herself and also suspend herself. I could not wrap my head around this because it is not what happens. When my own kids did come after all time, I still didn't get it. And sometimes today I look back at those days, the earliest ones, and feel a pang of regret that contracts at the center of my chest. Sometimes when I was young, I would look at my mom and watch her when she didn't know I could see her, laying down under her bed in her limpy, thin form, reading a magazine while twirling the hair she used to pull from the nape of her neck, or on the phone with one of her sisters. They would flirt in Farsi and would shift to Italian, then back to Farsi and on, or talking to a checkout clerk at the grocery store about what was included in the coupon. Those moments terrified me. The visceral helplessness of how much I needed my mom, how much I love my mom, is still sometimes too much to bear, too much that I want to leave my body, to retreat into my head, which is where I go when I'm scared to look for comfort. What do I wish my own mom did in the fury of her overwhelm? I guess I wish she had more patience. I wish she stayed inside of the same tone of voice, the soft and gentle one I could relate to. I wish she took deeper breaths. That inner voice, she asked me to wait and explain what she was doing. She had faith that eventually I would get it. I wish no matter how explosive it got, she stayed inside of that same tone of voice. She held her feet to the ground like tree trunks no matter what wind I was swept up in. There's one moment I'll never forget. From 3 weeks after they were born, I returned to my bedroom late one night after I'd finished with one of their feeds, and I started to cry, and AB asked, AB's her husband by the way, why I said I wasn't ready to go back to work, and he laughed because I was not going back, not for at least another 6 weeks. What I think now is that under those tears was a tacit understanding that when those cords were cut, something else tore off inside of me. I remembered a thought I had at the moment that I could cling for dear life to who I had been or become who was in front of me. I clung harder than ever before. This post is from August 2021. It also becomes trickier to distract yourself from confronting the big question, how do I want to raise my kids? You can get away with skirting this too, but if there is a gap between how you want to raise your kids, that is what kind of mother you want to be, and how you are raising kids, the kind of mother you are, it's trickier to notice, issue the task to order address it. I used to spend hours thinking of outfits, writing notes on my phone of different combinations that would come to me at random times. I planned for forthcoming events, create hypothetical scenarios that called for different expressions of what I believed the situations would ask for. I loved doing it so much, and sometimes when I have a free minute, I still do. And this post is from May 2022. Like, it takes so much pressure off bringing your whole self with you everywhere you go, exhausting, often untenable, and lets you marvel in this one isolated moment. This morsel of your identity, it struck me while we were talking that her limited knowledge expanded my self-understanding of that one morsel could see. After I told her my daughters are 4 and twins, I thought of how exciting they are when I get home or when they get home at the end of the day and we greet each other with so much enthusiasm. And then I said rather reflexively that those moments show me what being unconditionally loved feels like. Like all I have to do to excite my kids is be there when I'm there, you know. It might sound trite, or at least it does to me, because my mom used to assemble some versions of this sentiment and relay it on occasion, even if I never got it, and maybe that built up some resistance, a sort of conscious rebellion against understanding what I considered the corniest of her platitudes. This rebellion, I'm finding, is getting unproductive. This post is from December 2021. Guilt is one of those complicated feelings because you often don't know if you're feeling your guilt or if you're responding to some shitty conditioning. I guess all feelings are complicated in this way, but the thing with mom guilt is that, from what I understand, most of us feel it at one point or another. My instinct is always to interrogate why, and I don't know if this happens to you, but asking why and inventing the why tends to give me the reason to ride this feeling. In both instances, to blame, it doesn't end well. I either beat myself up or give over too much of my agency, making myself powerless. I honestly used to be comforted by making my feelings someone else's fault. I don't think I knew what I was doing. So, after reading all those, I really think the concept of motherhood has become very triggering for her for a lot of unresolved issues. I think, again, she is struggling with independence over her own identity versus other people's expectations and responsibilities. Something maybe Man Repeller was a great escape from, but she doesn't have that anymore. And while she is still working in the fashion world, motherhood has become pressing as her kids get older, and seems to be something that is consuming her in more ways than she thought it would. There isn't much literature on how motherhood and being a mother and watching your kids grow can trigger your own childhood issues, and how that can lead to an eating disorder or make an eating disorder worse or make recovery impossible. But I think these posts might go over it. So the first one is called The Relief of Yes. Sometime in March, I started to let my kids have gummy bears before dinner. I was sick of saying no. The way I tense up and start to get harsh felt like postured strictness, performative rigidity that misaligned with how I have known myself and want to know myself, a mother, a woman, and a person. So this starts off with a very normal thing all parents go through. It is saying, okay, do I want to be lenient or strict with, my kids' diet? I don't want to spoil their dinner and allow candy beforehand. Totally normal and fine. But then she does this a lot where she links a situation a mother has with their children to then this existential crisis of her identity and motherhood and her as a woman. And it seems very strange. Like what she's doing is both a normal thing, but to her, it doesn't appear to be, which I very think is interesting why and very indicative of the childhood she had that she talked about, but also didn't really talk about the issues of it or didn't seem to understand the issues. Because saying things like performative, rigidity, misaligned with how I know myself as a mother, a woman, a person. Oh my God, you're making a decision about how lenient or, strict to be as a parent, something people do every day. A decision a mother makes multiple times a day for most of their kids' lives. So the fact that it just comes off as so triggering and so, oh my God, this is such a pivotal moment in deciding who I am as a mother and a person and a woman really tells me that she is getting very sensitive about being a mother, which of course that happens. There's nothing wrong with being sensitive about being a mother, but in a way I think that could be very harmful for her. It started with gummy bears, but traversed into a whole world of other former no's. Some of the new yeses reinforced the old no's and gave them more gravitas when they were spoken. Others showed me a softness and a generosity that changed the dynamic between me and my kids and myself. I realized the harshness and rigidity I'd experienced in the face of an arbitrary no was related to the extent that I'd somehow began to accept conventions of good parenting that I had not challenged, had not been able to learn for myself, were right for the way I'm a parent. So what that boils down to is basically her beginning to question whether she and the childhood she had was correct, and all the things that she realizes she didn't like in her childhood now that she's doing it very differently with her children. And also, again, it's perfectly normal for parents to want to raise their kids differently than the childhood they had. Many parents are like, okay, this is how I was raised, and I understand why my parents did that. I don't like and agree with it. I'm not going to do it with my kids. That's something every generation goes through. But with her, the description of her awakening of how different she wants to raise her kids versus how she was raised is so alarming in how she writes about it, like it's this identity crisis, which it isn't. Every parent goes through that. How it makes her worry about every little bit of herself and her decision making as a mother, and how it seems how she is afraid to self-reflect on her own childhood, even though she finds herself doing that a lot, given how what a stark difference that she's raising her kids. These are things she's going through, and I think is not accepting well, but she doesn't seem to see that in her writing. And again, how she just makes everything this big deal, deciding whether your kids have gummy bears, saying yes or no to this or that. It's always linked to an existential crisis, challenges, harshness, rigidity. It's like she knows not to be as strict with her kids as her parents were, but also she is shocked by how it is so possible to not be strict with parents, with her own kids, I mean. So, and I'm just like, okay, why is this like so shocking that it's possible to, be a little bit liberal with the candy with kids or anything? It's so weird. And it just shows how she just never questioned anything in her childhood. And I think all of that is coming back to her now as she sees herself make decisions with her kids differently, which was not surprising when I reflect on it now, because there is no one size fits all. But what was interesting, I think, to realize in all of it is how much convention I'd accepted as truth. How much of the way I've been a parent has not reflected my mehood, but the culture around me or the culture I'm from. The passed down tenets I'd assumed and shapeshifted around to establish feigned harmony. That last two words scares me, feigned harmony. She's describing how her own values in childhood were feigned harmony. Feigned as in fake, as in forced. So she, in a way, is acknowledging that her childhood was filled with a lot of chaos that she could not even talk about, which, again, I think is why we're getting writing like this, how any semblance of peace or trying to make her kids as happy as possible by, giving them what they want, but obviously not being too liberal, so I don't want to spoil them. It's like, oh my God. It's like she's falling through the wardrobe to Narnia and is just shocked this whole other universe of parenting exists, and seems to be in a way afraid of it, even though she is, I think, making the right decisions with her kids. I'm not saying she's a bad mother at all, of course. And I think the decisions and questions she has about motherhood is something everything goes to, but it's also making her question a lot of things she didn't think she would question, that she's not happy to question. But honestly, as far as the gummy bears go before dinner, they never stopped my kids from eating their real meal. Hasn't brought on a cavity, though it will, hasn't provoked sugar come downs that look like tantrums, or maybe it has the slightest sense, but I don't feel as much as I do the more seamless flow that exists between us on days when I'm current is rough. So maybe it's like a trade-off. I'm not really sure. They're just gummy bears and kids. And this is, I'm just pulling this one passage example. She's like this with everything regarding her kid's situation. So I don't think she's controlling, but again, the fact she hyperthinks every little tiny decision with regard kids, like that's not healthy. That's really making you anxious, and that's definitely contributing to your health. It's so scary. And for the record, Leandra, as I said before, was raised very Orthodox Jewish. She is raising her children in the Jewish faith, and she is struggling with a bit of a balance of, how closely she wants to keep to orthodoxy. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I understand wanting to keep tradition alive, but also make changes. That's something every generation does. And I think that's great to make adjustments for modern times. But also, it's very clear that the way she was raised was more damaging to her, because her now actively removing it from her current life when it comes to her children is, again, such a scary thing, even though she's definitely going to do it, that I worry. And again, I think it's just also bringing back memories of her childhood. She had an eating disorder in childhood. So the fact she's so much now steeped in thinking about her own childhood compared to her children, that's again probably bringing back those memories and re-triggering the eating disorder and making her spiral worse now. Raising children is such a sensitive and deeply personal process. In a way, it's like agreeing you have your principles, your style, your values, splayed out in these exterior appendages that eventually break off and take what you give them, for better or for worse, to go off and be people in their own worlds. And this idea can be daunting when you think about your kids as extensions of you. I think it's put me in control mode before, wanting to do X for Y outcome or vice versa, to, in a way, unwittingly turn my kids into a sort of trophy that reflects my integrity. But what I am really coming to learn, what might be the great revelation of the season, is that the less I try to control the outcome, the less I try to massage what no or what rule will garner what result, giving up this idea that my kids are anything more than themselves being shepherded into their own experiences of adulthood. The easier it is to be a mom. Okay, sorry, that was a bit of a huge run-on sentence right there. But basically, she just admitted that her default thinking was that her kids are just extensions of her and that they're just like sheep to shepherd, which just shows how her childhood, which no wonder she had an eating disorder so badly, anorexia at a young age. And I think it also could explain why it's coming back. And again, I think does struggle even now with wanting her children to just like reflect exactly her, but also fighting that. And again, that's an internal battle, again, that I think is triggering the eating disorder. I want my kids to know me, to come and see and understand the inside of my world, and maintaining a sense of style that is for me, not letting it feel like a taboo to have my skin showing or to put the effort into how I dress reminds me of these desires. When I was growing up, my parents always brought me into their world. It made me strong and flexible, and it gave me confidence. I want the same for my kids. The way she was raised didn't give her confidence. Maybe it gave her a false sense of safety, that feigned harmony she talked about before. But also, again, come into her world. Well, there's nothing wrong with sharing heritage. That's great. But it seems like she can't really distinguish sharing, or she admits she can't really find the balance between sharing heritage and just copy and pasting all the stuff she knew. And again, I know I've mentioned her eating disorder, but I haven't really referenced any writing that has specifically echoed an anorexia language. In a lot of other posts like this, she does bring her body and talks about it. This is one of the worst ones. So I let my legs take me where they would, and it hit me like a wave in one of those steps when from the bottom of the gut of my belly I could feel this familiar and fierce and starkly intense longing. It's a weird kind of longing, elastic and stringy like a jellyfish that expands while somehow it's also contracting. And it kind of hurts, but it hurts so good. Previously, when I felt this sensation, I've tried to extract it and put it down, hoping that it would stop trailing me if it was pinned to the ground. But last night, I just wanted to hold it and look at it until I could know it better. I felt it so many times before, for the reasons that often did not feel like this sweet or tender in the way that it feels last night. And I think that's because the story I told was different from the ones that I told before. The story that came last night that occurred to me when I was walking was about how much I love my kids, about how huge the feeling is. So huge that I could touch it when I'm this close to it. And when I do, I sense that I can erupt in something, laughter or tears or deep knowing howls. It's like a free fall into an abyss of what is not yet known. I closed my eyes for a minute last night, and I could see this small finger pressed down on a heart leaning up against the domino line of hearts that escaped backtracking generations of women that I knew, even though I could not recognize them. And I had this thought about the intensity of feeling that exists between who we were bound to. That was such a mess, talking about physically manifesting her feelings into a physical form and wrestling with it, and then also how that is just her wrestling with her identity. Oh my God, that was just insane. And it seems like, in a sense, her anorexia is really about putting her feelings into a physical form for her to feel more tangible with them, I think. And I pictured myself brushing my daughter's hair in front of their mirror before school in the morning, and I could see my mom brushing mine too. I could hear us on the days that we'd laugh or sing together, and I could hear the days we'd scream or rage too. And these memories weren't distant anymore. They were right there in front of me. I was living them, and in that short space of time, I started to cry. For my daughter, myself, my mother, her mom, every woman who has loved who came before her, who has loved who came after her too. Yeah, that's totally not her being triggered. I really think this whole new business venture blog, the Cafe Mom Cereal Aisle is what she calls it, is really just more her personal, like, it's her diary masquerading as like a business, basically. and her just to get out her parenting thoughts that are clearly very triggering and I think are contributing to her anorexia spiral. And I really hope she gets help. I really do. If she is going to break away from the Orthodox tradition enough with her kids, she should do it enough to acknowledge she needs help and get therapy. Let me know what you think.